All right, RMT students, welcome. This is a quick explainer designed to be the perfect recap of your Day 1 endocrine material. Let's get you ready for that quiz.
You ready to dive into this? Okay, let's do it. We're going to start with the big picture, just to make sure we're all on the same page.
So, what is the endocrine system really? Well, you can think of it as the body's other control system. It's the one that uses chemical signals, or hormones, to maintain that all-important balance. You know the word, homeostasis. It's all about keeping things stable.
Now, a really key concept to lock in is how this system is different from the one you're probably more familiar with, the nervous system. They're both running the show, but they operate on completely different schedules. Think about it like this. The nervous system is like sending a direct email. It uses electrical impulses, it's lightning fast, we're talking milliseconds, and the effect is over almost instantly. The endocrine system, though, that's more like sending out a company-wide memo. It sends chemical hormones through the bloodstream, so it's a bit slower to arrive, but its impact is way broader and lasts a whole lot longer.
So who are these key players sending out all these chemical memos? Well, let's meet the glands. These are the factories, the places that are producing and shipping out all the hormones. Okay, check this out. This is a super important chain of command called the HPA axis. That stands for hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal glands, and it's basically our primary stress response system. It's a total top-down operation, starting right in the brain. The hypothalamus sends out a hormone called CRH to the pituitary. The pituitary then sends out its signal, ACTH, which travels all the way down to the adrenal glands and tells them to release the stress hormone, cortisol. See that? A perfect top-down hierarchy. Now, while that HPA axis is a huge deal for stress, you have to remember there's this whole team of glands working together. You've got the hypothalamus, pituitary, the pineal gland, thyroid and parathyroids, the adrenal glands we just met, the pancreas, all the way down to the ovaries and testes. They all have a part to play. We'll get to the others in later lessons, but for now, just recognize the whole team. All right, now we get to what might be the trickiest part of Day 1. How does this system know when to turn on and, maybe more importantly, when to turn off? I mean, really think about that. The body needs some kind of mechanism to keep things in check, right? Because too much of a good thing can cause some serious problems. The answer here is a really crucial concept for your quiz, so listen up.
And here it is. The answer is a negative feedback loop. Let's trace how this works. Some kind of stimulus, like stress, gets detected up in the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus sends out its signal, CRH. That's the input to the control center, the pituitary. The pituitary then sends out its output signal, ACTH, down to the adrenal glands. The adrenals respond and release the final hormone, cortisol. And here's the magic trick. That cortisol travels back up and tells the hypothalamus and the pituitary, hey, job's done. You can stop sending signals now. The final product literally shuts off the factory.
So here are those steps all broken down. It's a self-correcting loop. The big point to remember is that the response, that rising hormone level, is what shuts off the whole process. It's just like a thermostat in your house, right? When the temperature gets high enough, the furnace turns itself off. Same exact principle. It's a beautiful thing. Okay, so we've covered the theory. We get the glands, the hormones, the feedback loops. But why is all this so critical for you as a future RMT?
Well, think about that HPA axis pathway we just looked at, the one that deals with stress. This is exactly where your work comes into play. You have a direct, hands-on ability to influence this whole system.
So here's the deal, and this is so important. Your therapeutic touch is not just affecting muscles. You are actively helping to regulate your client's entire chemical state. By promoting relaxation, you help downregulate that HPA axis. How? By stimulating the vagus nerve, you help shift the body from a sympathetic fight-or-flight state into that parasympathetic rest and digest state, which naturally lowers cortisol. You're also improving circulation, which is the very highway these hormones use to travel. This knowledge lets you support their overall homeostasis. This right here is a key takeaway from your course materials. It's such a powerful way to understand the value of what you do. You are an external input that can help recalibrate an internal system and bring it back towards balance. So let's end with a little bit of clinical thinking. Your client comes in, they report chronic fatigue, they're always sensitive to cold. After what we've just reviewed, which endocrine gland might pop into your head? If you were thinking about the thyroid gland, you're on the right track. It's the body's thermostat. It regulates our metabolism. Now, of course, you don't diagnose, but recognizing these classic signs helps you see the whole person, understand their condition, and adapt your treatment safely. And that is what makes you a more effective therapist. Keep this stuff in mind as you keep studying.
All right, Willis College RMT students, got quiz 1 on the endocrine system coming up? You're in exactly the right place. We're going to cut right through all the complexity and really nail down the core concepts from day 2, the stuff you absolutely have to know. Let's get right into it.
Okay, so here's what we're covering. First, we'll hit the basics, how hormones are even made and how they get around. Then we'll jump into the body's amazing control system. After that, we'll look at what happens when things go wrong, when that control is lost. And, maybe most importantly, we're going to connect all of this back to what you do as an RMT. This should all look pretty familiar, right? We're basically walking through your lesson plan to make sure these ideas really sink in.
All right, first things first, the fundamentals. You can't really get the big picture until you know who the main players are. And we're talking about hormones, of course. These are the body's tiny chemical messengers, zipping around to deliver super important instructions to pretty much every cell in your body.
Now here's a really key distinction. Not all hormones travel the same way. So you've got your water-soluble hormones, like insulin, right? They can just dissolve right into the blood plasma and cruise around freely, no problem. But then you have the lipid-soluble ones. Think of things like cortisol or your thyroid hormones. They're basically like oil and water. They just can't mix. So to get anywhere, they have to grab onto a special transport protein. It's like having a personal chauffeur to get them through the watery highway of our bloodstream.
Okay, so we've got how they travel down. But how does the body control all this? I mean, how does it know when to pump out more hormones and when to, pull back? That's where we get to the real brains of the operation. This incredible feedback system that's all about maintaining the body's perfect balance, what we call homeostasis.
Now, probably the single most important concept you need to grasp here is the negative feedback loop. And listen, don't let the word negative throw you off. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's not about stopping something. It's about reversing a change. The whole point, the entire goal, is stability. It's about keeping those hormone levels from going way up or way down, just keeping them in that perfect, balanced, sweet spot.
You've probably heard this one before, but the thermostat analogy is classic for a reason. It just works perfectly. Think about it. Your house gets too hot, the thermostat kicks on the AC. The house cools down to that perfect temperature you set, and boom, the thermostat tells the AC to shut off. That's exactly what your body is doing with hormones, 24/7.
So, let's look at a real-life example of this in action. What you're seeing here is the negative feedback loop for glucocorticoids. Our stress hormones. Cortisol is the big one everyone's heard of. This whole pathway is running all the time to manage how our body deals with stress. I know, it looks a little complicated at first glance, but don't worry. We're going to break it down step by step on the next slide.
Okay, here we go. Let's trace that whole process. So it all starts with some kind of stimulus, let's say stress. Your hypothalamus, deep in your brain, senses this, and it's like, whoa, sound the alarm. It sends a signal to the pituitary gland. The pituitary then sends out its own messenger, a hormone called ACTH. ACTH zooms down to the adrenal glands and basically yells, release the cortisol. Now here's the magic, the negative feedback part. Once those cortisol levels in the blood get high enough, the cortisol itself tells the hypothalamus and the pituitary, hey guys, you can cool it, turn off the alarm. See, it's a beautiful, self-regulating loop. Really getting the sequence down is going to be huge for your quiz. Okay, so that's how it's supposed to work. It's this elegant, beautiful system. But what happens when it breaks? What if the signals get crossed, or production goes haywire, or the messages just aren't getting through? Well, that's when we start talking about endocrine dysfunction. We're moving into pathology now.
When things go wrong with the endocrine system, it usually comes down to one of a few things. You could have a gland that's just not making enough hormone, that's hyposecretion, or it's making way too much, that's hypersecretion. Sometimes the hormone level is totally fine, but the cells it's trying to talk to have broken receptors, so they can't hear the message. Or maybe they just don't have enough receptors to begin with. And then there's the big one. Mass lesions like tumors that are physically messing with the gland's ability to do its job.
And while any of those can cause a problem, tumors are a really common one. But here's what you absolutely have to understand. A tumor is a 2-for-1 problem. It's a dual threat. First, yeah, it can mess with hormone levels, making too much or too little. But second, its sheer physical size and where it's located can cause a whole other set of problems all on their own.
Let's take the pituitary gland as a perfect example. Anatomically, it sits right next to the optic nerve in the skull. So what happens if a tumor starts growing there? It can literally press on that nerve. So a client might come in, and they're not talking about hormone issues at all. They're complaining about their vision.
This is a classic example of how a mass lesion can create symptoms that seem completely unrelated to the endocrine system. And it just goes to show you how important it is to know your anatomy inside and out.
Okay, so this is where the rubber meets the road. Why does any of this matter to you as a future RMT? Right? How does knowing about feedback loops in pituitary tumors actually help you when you've got a client on the table? This is where we bridge that gap from the textbook to the treatment room.
Just picture this for a second. A client walks into your clinic. They tell you they're just not handling stress well, and they mention that a little injury they got a while back is taking forever to heal. Now, the old way of thinking might be to just go, okay, stress and muscle tension, got it. But with this knowledge, your brain should light up. You should immediately start thinking on a much deeper, more systemic level.
This right here is the critical thinking piece. Poor stress tolerance, slow healing, ding, ding, ding. Those are classic signs that could point to something going on with cortisol levels. Remember, cortisol isn't just a stress hormone. It's massive for inflammation and tissue repair. Same with thyroid hormones. They run your metabolism, which directly impacts how fast you heal. Now, super important, you are not diagnosing here, but you are recognizing potential red flags. That's the key.
And that recognition leads right into how you actually treat them. If your client's system is already struggling with stress, is a super deep, aggressive treatment really the best idea today? Probably not. It could just tax their system even more. If they're healing slowly, you've got to be extra careful with your pressure and techniques around that injury. This knowledge lets you adapt on the fly. It makes your treatments not just more effective, but way safer.
So as we wrap this up, I really want this to be your main takeaway. Understanding these deep underlying systems, that is what's going to elevate you from being a technician who just works on muscles to being a true healthcare professional. Your client's stress, it's not just in their head. It's a real physiological event. It's a whole cascade of hormones affecting every single tissue you lay your hands on. Keep that in mind when you're studying for your quiz. Good luck, and seriously, never, ever stop asking these deeper questions.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the command center of your endocrine system. This is a review tailored specifically for you, massage therapy students. We're going to recap the super important roles of the hypothalamus and pituitary glands, and, crucially, connect it all back to what you're seeing on the treatment table every day. Okay, let's jump right in. Meet the brain's ultimate power couple, the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. I mean, look at them. They work in this incredibly tight partnership, and together they form what we call the hypothalamic pituitary axis, or the HPA axis for short. And that axis, well, that's really at the heart of everything we're talking about today. So here's our game plan. First, we'll quickly review the main control system. Then we'll properly meet our two key players. We'll look at the hormones they're in charge of, see what happens when things go haywire, and then we'll wrap it all up by talking about why this matters so much for you as a therapist. All right, section 1. Before we can even get into the glands themselves, we got to take a quick step back and refresh a concept that is absolutely fundamental to the entire endocrine system. I'm talking about the negative feedback loop. You can basically think of it like a smart thermostat for your body. It is constantly working behind the scenes to maintain balance, or what we call homeostasis. So if a hormone level gets a little too high, this system kicks in and tells the gland, hey, ease up. If it gets too low, it signals it to ramp up production. The whole goal is just keeping things in that perfect, stable range. And this diagram, it just shows the process perfectly. You've got a stimulus that kicks the hypothalamus into gear. It tells the pituitary what to do, which then tells the adrenal glands to release cortisol. But, and this is the genius part, that cortisol doesn't just go out into the body. It also reports back to the hypothalamus and pituitary and tells them, okay, job done, you can shut off now. It's this beautiful, self-regulating loop. Okay, so now that we've got the feedback loop down, let's formally meet the two glands sitting at the very top of this entire chain of command. Their partnership is absolutely key to regulating just about everything, from growth and metabolism to how we respond to the world around us. And here it is, the pituitary gland. You can see it's located right in the center of things, totally protected by bone. That prime real estate isn't an accident, you know. It highlights just how important it is. It's the master control center, constantly taking in information and sending out orders. You know, the easiest way to think about this is with an analogy. The hypothalamus is like the company's CEO. It's the big picture thinker, coordinating everything and taking in data from all over. The pituitary gland, that's your general manager. It takes those high-level orders from the CEO and then executes them, telling all the other endocrine glands what they need to do. So, how does this general manager, the pituitary, actually carry out its orders? Well, it's all about hormones. Let's take a look at some of the specific hormonal directives that the pituitary sends out to the rest of the body. Okay, so what's really interesting here is the division of labor. If you look, the anterior pituitary, the front part, actually makes a bunch of hormones like growth hormone and ACTH, but the posterior pituitary, the back part, it's more like a storage warehouse. It doesn't make its own hormones. It just stores and releases two key ones, ADH and oxytocin, that are actually produced up in the hypothalamus. Pretty cool, right? And this right here, this is a huge takeaway for you and your clients. Growth hormone isn't just for kids growing taller. For adults, its main job is tissue regeneration and repair. And since it's mostly released during that deep stage 4 sleep, any client you have with sleep problems might actually have a shortage of this vital chemical they need for healing, and that has direct implications for their recovery from any injury. So we have this elegant system of communication, of feedback, but what happens when it breaks down? Well, that's when we get into the pathophysiology of the endocrine system. Endocrine disorders really boil down to two main problems. You've either got hypofunction, which means there's too little of a hormone being made, or you've got hyperfunction, where there's way too much. And the causes can be anything from the body attacking itself to, very commonly, tumors on the glands. So to diagnose these problems, clinicians have to play detective to figure out where the breakdown is. Is the problem with the final gland in the chain, like the adrenal gland? That's a primary disorder. Is the problem with our general manager, the pituitary? That's a secondary disorder. And if the problem is all the way at the top, with the CEO, the hypothalamus, we call that a tertiary disorder. Like I said, tumors are a really common cause. And they don't just create problems by messing with hormone levels. The tumor itself can actually grow and create what's called a mass lesion. And that just means it's physically pressing on all the stuff around it in the very tightly packed space of the brain. Okay, so let's put our anatomy hats on for a second. Think back to that picture we saw of the pituitary gland, all nestled in the center of the head. What really important structure is right next door? What's super vulnerable to that pressure? If you're thinking about vision, you are spot on. It's the optic nerve, and pressure on it can cause some pretty significant visual problems. All right, let's bring all of this theory back to where it counts, into the treatment room. Let's really dig into why understanding this complex command center is going to make you a better, more effective massage therapist. This right here is the key, the absolute main takeaway. Your knowledge of the endocrine system isn't for diagnosing people, of course not. It's to help you make informed, critical decisions that make your treatments safer, more comfortable, and ultimately more effective for your client. Your work, what you do with your hands, it directly interacts with this very system. A relaxing massage can literally help downregulate that stress response, which we now know is run by the HPA axis. So by helping to lower cortisol, you are actively helping your client's body get back to that state of balance, of homeostasis. So let's make this super practical. Imagine a client comes in, and on their intake form, they mention chronic fatigue and that they're always cold. Your pathology knowledge should start pinging. You might think, thyroid? Adrenals? Again, you're not diagnosing, you're adapting. It means you make sure the room is extra warm, maybe you use more soothing techniques, and you check in on their comfort way more often. So, to wrap things up, I'm just going to leave you with a question to think about. How will this deeper understanding of the body's command center, the HPA axis, the stress response, the process of healing, how is that going to change the way you approach your very next client who walks in feeling stressed out or just plain exhausted? You now have this powerful new lens to see your clients not just as a set of muscles, but as the whole amazing dynamic systems they truly are.
Okay, welcome back everyone. Today we're jumping right back into the endocrine system with a really important review. We're going to focus on what is arguably the powerhouse of the entire system, the pituitary gland.
So you've probably heard this term thrown around, right? The pituitary as the master gland. But what does that actually mean in practice? How does this tiny little pea-sized gland at the base of your brain manage to run the whole show? Well, that's exactly what we're going to get crystal clear on today.
Here's the first key thing to remember. The master gland doesn't actually work alone. Not at all. It's more like a middle manager that takes its orders from the CEO, and that CEO is the hypothalamus. Together, they form this incredible command center called the hypothalamic pituitary axis, and it's the bridge that connects your nervous system directly to your endocrine system.
So how does this whole command center keep things from, spiraling out of control? It uses this really brilliant system called negative feedback.
Honestly, the easiest way to think about it is like the thermostat in your house. When the room gets warm enough, the thermostat signals the furnace to turn off. Your body does the exact same thing with hormones to keep everything in that perfect state of balance, which we call homeostasis.
Okay, this diagram right here shows you that whole process in action. Let's just trace it for a second. See how the hypothalamus sends a releasing hormone down to the anterior pituitary? The pituitary then fires off a stimulating hormone, in this case TSH, to a target gland, like the thyroid. Then the thyroid releases its hormones. As soon as those levels get high enough in the blood, a signal goes all the way back up to the top, to both the pituitary and the hypothalamus, basically saying, hey, we're good down here. You can stop now. And that's it. That is the negative feedback loop that keeps the whole system beautifully regulated.
Now, while almost everything in your body runs on that stabilizing negative feedback, there is an opposite, and it's much rarer but incredibly powerful: positive feedback. Instead of hitting the brakes, positive feedback mashes the accelerator. It amplifies the response. The classic example you'll always hear is oxytocin during childbirth. A contraction starts, which stimulates more oxytocin release. That causes an even stronger contraction, which then stimulates, you guessed it, even more oxytocin. It's a system designed to push a process forward to a specific endpoint, not to maintain a steady balance.
All right, let's take a quick tour of the gland itself, and we'll start with the front, the anterior pituitary. You can think of this part as the main factory floor. This is where a whole bunch of really critical hormones are actually made and then sent out into the body.
And look at this list. It's kind of amazing how many different jobs are being directed from this one tiny spot. You've got growth hormone for bones and muscles, ACTH talking to the adrenal glands, TSH for the thyroid, and of course, FSH and LH, which are the main players in reproduction. And we can't forget prolactin for lactation. These are the real worker hormones, sent out to do specific jobs all over the body.
Now let's swing around to the back, to the posterior pituitary. Functionally, this area is completely different. It's not a factory at all. It's more like a storage warehouse and a shipping terminal for just two specific hormones that are actually produced up in the hypothalamus.
So the two hormones it releases are antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, which is all about managing your body's water balance, and oxytocin, which, as we just mentioned, triggers uterine contractions and also milk ejection. So two very distinct, very potent functions managed from here. Okay, so that's the physiology review. But now we get to the big question, right? Let's bring this all back to your practice. Why on earth does any of this matter to you as a massage therapist? I absolutely love this quote from pathology expert Ruth Werner. I think it just perfectly nails this bigger shift in how we understand our work. We're not just muscle mechanics. We're not just working on fascia. The therapeutic touch we provide has a direct and, profound impact on the deepest regulatory systems in the body, and that includes the endocrine system. Think about it. Our work can directly influence that hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis. When we help a client get into that deep state of relaxation, we are helping to downregulate the production of stress hormones like cortisol, and that helps promote better endocrine balance, which means better overall health. So knowing if a client is dealing with something like chronic fatigue or stress helps us build a smarter, safer, and much more effective treatment plan.
So I'm going to leave you with a little clinical puzzle to chew on. A new client walks in, their main complaints are chronic fatigue, and they're always cold, very sensitive to cold touch. Based on what we've just reviewed about the pituitary and the glands it talks to, which parts of this whole axis might be struggling? Give it some thought, and we will break it all down in our next session. Fantastic review today, everyone.
All right, if you're gearing up for your quiz on day 5 of the endocrine system, you are in the perfect spot. We're going to break down everything you need to know about the thyroid and parathyroid glands so you can walk into that test feeling totally prepared. So here's what we're going to tackle. First, we'll look at the thyroid's main job as the body's thermostat. Then, we'll get into the really cool system that keeps its hormones balanced. After that, we'll see what happens when things go wrong, we'll do a quick dive into the parathyroid's job, and, most importantly, we'll bring it all back to what it means for you as a massage therapist. Okay, first up, the thyroid. It might be a small gland, but I want you to think of it as the master control center for your body's entire metabolism. It's the engine, it's the gas pedal, it's in charge. Let's start with a scenario you're definitely going to encounter. Your client comes in, they're always tired, always feeling cold. From what you know about the endocrine system, which gland should immediately pop into your head? This is exactly the kind of clinical thinking you need to develop. And if you are thinking thyroid gland, you are absolutely on the right track. This little butterfly-shaped gland is often the key player. And just as a quick anatomy refresher, don't forget where it is, right at the front of the neck, just below the larynx. It's a really important landmark. So here's the bottom line. The thyroid basically sets the pace for your entire metabolism. It tells every cell in your body how quickly to burn fuel, like oxygen and calories, and turn it into energy. And when you understand that, it makes perfect sense why a problem here leads directly to symptoms like feeling tired and cold all the time. Okay, so if the thyroid is this super powerful engine, the body obviously can't just let it run at full speed all the time. So that brings up the next big question. How does the body regulate this whole system to keep things in balance? To maintain homeostasis? Well, the answer is this really elegant system called a negative feedback loop. And the thermostat analogy you see here, it's perfect. Think about it. When your house gets too hot, the thermostat tells the furnace to shut off. When it gets too cold, it kicks it back on. Your body does the exact same thing to keep your hormone levels just right. Now, I know this diagram says cortisol, but don't let that throw you. The principle is 100% the same for the thyroid. It's a chain of command. The hypothalamus tells the pituitary what to do. The pituitary then releases TSH, that's the thyroid-stimulating hormone, which tells the thyroid to get to work. But as soon as those thyroid hormones in the blood get high enough, they send a message back up to the top saying, hey, we're good down here, you can back off now. That's the negative feedback loop in action. But what happens when this beautifully tuned system breaks down? Things like autoimmune diseases, where the body actually attacks its own thyroid, or even tumors, can just throw this whole thing completely out of whack. And when that happens, it really boils down to one of two outcomes. Either the gland isn't making enough hormone, that's hyposecretion, or it's making way too much, and that's hypersecretion. As an RMT, you need to know the signs of both. This slide lays out those two extremes perfectly. On the one hand, with hypothyroidism, the body's thermostat is set way too low. Everything is sluggish. That's where you get the fatigue and cold sensitivity. On the other hand, you've got hyperthyroidism, where the thermostat is cranked all the way up. The metabolism is just racing, which leads to things like anxiety, a rapid heart rate, and feeling hot all the time. Okay, let's switch gears for just a second. Also part of your Day 5 material were the thyroid's tiny but very important neighbors, the parathyroid glands. So you'll usually find 4 of these little glands tucked away on the back of the thyroid, and their job is totally different. While the thyroid is running your metabolism, the parathyroids are the master regulators of calcium in your blood. And that's absolutely critical because you need the right amount of calcium for your nerves to fire and your muscles to contract. If that's out of balance, a client might complain about things like muscle twitching or cramping. All right, let's bring this all home. Let's talk about your treatment room. As a massage therapist, why does any of this stuff actually matter when you have a client on your table? I want you to think of this slide as your mental checklist. The second a client writes down a thyroid condition on their health history form, these are the things that should pop into your head. If they have hypothyroidism, they're probably cold, so maybe grab an extra blanket. If they have hyperthyroidism, they might be hot, so keep the room a little cooler. You've got to be ready to change your pressure, maybe even shorten the session based on their energy levels, and always be aware of how their skin might feel or what side effects their medication might have. So we'll end on this question, and I really want you to think about it as you review your notes. Because it's one thing to memorize the signs and symptoms. The real test is applying that knowledge. How would your massage be different for someone whose system is running too fast versus someone whose system is running too slow? Understanding that difference, that's what makes you a safe, thoughtful, and truly effective therapist. You've got this. Good luck on your quiz. Welcome to The Explainer. All right, today we're going to dive into something pretty incredible. Your body's silent but super powerful command center. The endocrine system. I mean, this is the network that's pulling the strings on everything from your energy levels to your mood to how you grow. So let's just start with a really big question. Have you ever stopped to think about how your body coordinates everything? I'm talking about growth, your metabolism, how you react to stress, all happening at the exact same time. How on earth does it all stay in sync? Well, the answer is actually really cool and, surprisingly elegant. It turns out our body has not just one, but 2 master control systems, and they're working together in perfect harmony to run the whole show. Okay, so let's meet the 2 big bosses in charge of all this. You've got the nervous system, which is like lightning fast, and then you have its partner, the endocrine system, which is a bit more slow and steady. And these 2 systems have totally different ways of doing things. The nervous system, think of it like firing off a super fast text message. It uses these things called neurotransmitters for really quick, immediate responses that don't last very long. But the endocrine system, that's more like sending out a company-wide memo, through the mail. It uses hormones that travel all the way through your bloodstream. Yeah, they take a lot longer to get where they're going, but when they do, the effects can stick around for seconds, hours, or even days. So let's really zero in on those chemical memos. Because if we're going to understand the endocrine system, we absolutely have to learn to speak its language. And that language is the language of hormones. So what is a hormone really? Well, put simply, it's a chemical messenger. It's made in one part of your body, and then it travels, usually in your blood, to go tell cells in a totally different area what to do. You could say it's like the body's original long-distance communication network. Pretty cool, right? Okay, so things got a little more interesting here. Hormones basically come in two main types, ones that dissolve in water and ones that dissolve in lipids, or fat. And this one little difference, it's a huge deal. It completely changes how they get around in the blood, and even more importantly, how they actually deliver their message once they reach a cell. Let's look at the lipid-soluble ones first. Because they're fat-soluble, they can just slip right through the cell's outer layer, which is also made of fat. It's like they have a backstage pass. They just waltz right inside, find their special receptor, and head straight for the cell's main control center, the nucleus. And from there, they can directly turn specific genes on or off. I mean, they're literally rewriting the cell's to-do list. Now, the water-soluble hormones are a different story. They can't get past that fatty cell membrane. It's like a bouncer at a club. So what do? They act like a delivery person. They ring the doorbell by latching onto a receptor on the outside of the cell. This kicks off a chain reaction and creates a second messenger on the inside. And it's that second messenger that actually runs around and gets the job done, activating proteins to carry out the original hormone's orders. All right, so we've got these different types of messengers, but that begs the question, who's sending them in the first place? Where do the orders come from? Well, for that, we have to go right to the top of the chain of command, to a control center buried deep inside the brain. And this is where we meet the absolute power duo of the endocrine system. You can think of the hypothalamus, this tiny little region in your brain, as the CEO. It's constantly checking in on the rest of the body, making all the big executive calls. And then, sitting just below it, you have the pituitary gland. That's the senior manager. Its job is to take the CEO's decisions and send out the specific hormonal memos to all the different departments in the body. And this isn't just a metaphor, by the way. The connection is totally literal. There's this physical stalk, it's called the infundibulum, that directly links the two. It's like a private hotline, making sure the instructions get passed down instantly and correctly. Okay, and here's where this system gets really, really clever. The hypothalamus talks to the front part of the pituitary gland using its own private little network of blood vessels. It's called the hypophyseal portal system. Through this dedicated channel, it sends these super potent little hormones that basically act as go or stop signals. It's an incredibly precise way to tell the pituitary, hey, release this hormone right now, or nope, hold off on that one for a bit. So we know how the orders are sent. Now let's get into the what. What are these specific orders? What hormones is the anterior pituitary actually sending out into the body? The best way to think about the anterior pituitary is like a factory with 5 different specialized production lines. You've got the somatotrophs over here. They're busy making human growth hormone. Then you have thyrotrophs making thyroid-stimulating hormone, and on and on. Each type of cell is a total specialist, laser-focused on one particular job. And wow, the hormones they're making are responsible for some of the absolute biggest jobs in your body. You've got HGH, which literally makes you grow. TSH is in charge of your thyroid, which controls your metabolism, how fast you burn energy. FSH and LH, they're absolutely crucial for reproduction. Then there's prolactin for milk production, and ACTH, which is basically your body's main stress management hormone. I mean, that is a seriously powerful and diverse portfolio of responsibilities. Okay, so you've got this really complex chain of command, and it's sending out all these super powerful instructions. It makes you wonder, right? How does the body make sure the system doesn't just go haywire? How does it keep everything in balance? The answer is one of those things that's so simple, it's just brilliant. It's all about self-regulation. The system has its own built-in off switch, and in biology, we call this a negative feedback loop. It works just like a thermostat in your house. So let's say a gland, like your thyroid, releases enough of its hormone. Once the level of that hormone in your blood gets high enough, it sends a signal all the way back up to the bosses, the hypothalamus and pituitary. It's basically telling them, hey,
The room is warm enough, you can turn off the furnace now. That simple feedback stops them from making more, and it's what keeps your hormone levels from getting too high or too low. It's all about perfect balance.
And that really brings us full circle, doesn't it? The whole point of this incredibly intricate dance of glands, hormones, and feedback loops is to regulate and integrate everything your body does, all to keep you in that stable, perfectly balanced state that we call homeostasis.
So now you know the chain of command, you know how it's all supposed to work in perfect harmony. But that leads to the next big question, right? What happens when a link in that chain breaks? Because understanding the healthy system is just the beginning.